What's going on, everybody? It's your old pal CHH, and today we're doing top 16 movies of the 1970s. Now, I'm going to go out and say this now. The absolute best decade of horror of all time is the 70s. Movies from the 70s are still undefeated. There are movies from that decade that will probably never be topped in all of human history. Maybe there'll be another renaissance like the 70s. I think the 80s was a renaissance on and of itself, but there's no doubt that the 70s was the Wild West where actual legendary films were made, including what I consider to be some of, if not the best films, period. Especially like my number one, for instance, but God knows we're going to get there. So without further ado, guys, let's get started. Coming in at number 16, gotta throw this one out to my boy Charlie Band with Tourist Trap. Tourist Trap is an absolute classic. Love this movie. Was filmed right around, if not the exact same time Halloween was filmed, and I think that Charlie even visited the Halloween set while making Tourist Trap as well. Classic film. Charles Band actually funded this movie with mafia money, and when he didn't pay it back fast enough, they blew up his house. Yes, I'm not making that up. They blew up his house. I read it in his memoir, Confessions of a Puppet Master. I'm looking at the book right there. Classic film, terrifying stuff with mannequins, has haunted me till this very day. So yeah, you're damn right, Tourist Trap is in my top 16. Coming in at number 15, guys, comes in with Alice, Sweet Alice. Arrow just put out a 4K of this movie. I picked up a real nice Blu-ray for this movie a few years ago. Talk about a great kind of slasher mystery. Who's doing this? Great movie. I mean, the poster art as well is iconic. I've got a few releases of Alice, Sweet Alice now. I've got an awesome DVD release. This is a great movie that holds up better today than probably when it did when it came out. I got nothing bad to say about Alice, Sweet Alice. I think this is just a sensational movie. And it's really one of the better films that you would call like a slasher film. And look at this. This is one that came out before Halloween even. So Alice, Sweet Alice is probably the most underrated film of all time in horror. At least one of them. I think Alice, Sweet Alice, I've never seen anybody watch this movie and say, yeah, I don't really get it or I didn't dig it. No, most people, when they watch Alice, Sweet Alice, they're like, damn, I was not expecting that. Classic. I got nothing but love for Alice, Sweet Alice. Alright, guys, coming in at number 14, man, this is a movie that exists solely because of Jaws, but that doesn't mean it's not good. Of course, I'm talking about Orca, the killer whale. I mean, I love this movie. Some people actually say that this is the best Jaws sequel in the sense that it was made because Jaws was what it was. I will say this. I think Orca is great. I would say it's about as good as Jaws 2. But really great movie with some great story to it. And it plays out more like a revenge movie than anything because of what happens to the orcas in the film. Dino De Laurentiis project as well. Just a good movie. Just a really good movie. I got nothing but good things to say about Orca. If you haven't seen that, I say go for it. I think it's great. Alright, guys, number 13. I love this movie. It's one of the very first Scream Factory Blu-rays I ever had. I won a 4K of this yesterday. I'm talking about The Town That Dreaded Sundown. This movie's creepy. I mean, when I watched The Town That Dreaded Sundown, I had not really seen anything that kind of exuded that sort of realism, in a sense, if you will. It was really a different experience. The Texarkana Killer, I believe is what he goes by. Now, a lot of people know that, you know, Friday the 13th Part 2 clearly took the image of the killer from The Town That Dreaded Sundown and used it for that movie. But this movie, I mean, this is the creepiest guy with a bag over the head. And this is kind of different from a lot of the stuff I've talked about in this list because there is this sense of realism that they were going for with The Town That Dreaded Sundown that I think works really well. So I got nothing but great things to say about this movie. I think it's a classic. And I do think it's better than the movies that I've listed so far for different reasons. But I think what Town That Dreaded Sundown is going for, it succeeds to the 10th degree. So nothing but love for Town That Dreaded Sundown, one of my favorites from the 70s. Coming in at number 12, guys, is none other than the original Amityville Horror. Now, I know, number 12, but listen, this list was not easy to make, and everything above this is banger after banger that you'll see. I think that the 70s, like I said, was amazing. But listen, I mean, Amityville Horror, it's got to be in there, right? I mean, just a great kind of haunted house movie. With some legendary scenes with the priest in the house and, you know, the performances in this one. This is definitely a movie I found that the older I got, the more I started to appreciate it. Now, the sequel, I'll talk about it all day long. I think Amityville 2, The Possession, is quite frankly, one of the best horror sequels of all time. But that doesn't mean that the original Amityville Horror is not a classic. I think this one betters with your own age, more so than with age, because the movie's old enough now that it's been a classic for decades. But my point is, I think the older you get, and, you know, the more you experience different types of movies, you can go back and really get some appreciation for it. So, all right, guys, number 11 is Bob Clark's Black Christmas. I mean, a lot of people look at this as one of the best slashers. Again, legendary scenes. I remember watching Black Christmas for the first time and being really kind of awestruck by the telephone call in the beginning and the stuff the guy was saying over the phone. Because this was like stuff that was like, man, it was grotesque. It was raunchy stuff this guy was saying. But, I mean, talk about like I said, talk about a performance. There are scenes in this that are truly haunting, with one of the girls in the chair. It's kind of the iconic shot of the movie. You'll see this image on the poster even. But yeah, Black Christmas, I mean, talk about a legendary film. I think there are movies that, you know, in their certain subsets can never be topped. And for instance, like with Christmas horror, forget about it. You're not topping Black Christmas. It's just one of the best. All right, guys, top 10 time. Here we go. Number 10, we're going over to Don Coscarelli's Phantasm. I mean, Phantasm is really that movie that when people start talking about 70s horror, it doesn't get brought up immediately, but then when somebody says, oh yeah, you remember 79's Phantasm, everybody goes, oh yeah, and then they remember how good it was. I think it's because it's 79, maybe people just, I don't know, the late 70s, there are some juggernauts, but I think Phantasm is a juggernaut. I think it's the little movie that could, and it just goes to show that, you know, if you've got a great idea and passion behind it, you can make it happen. And Coscarelli just made an all-timer, in my opinion, with the Tall Man being really as iconic as anything. I mean, when you look at the imagery of the Tall Man, you look at the scenes and the dialogue, I'd put him up there with Pinhead or, you know, other characters like Freddy and Jason. You know, he may not be in the very front of that collage of the, you know, 70s and 80s horror icons, but he's pretty close up, in my opinion. Like, you can see him pretty close when you look at it. So, yeah, Phantasm is great, and I think the music is really a driving factor behind why, you know, this movie is so good. The Phantasm score is iconic. I love it. All right, guys, coming in at number 9, I got to throw it to Mr. Argento over in Italy with Suspiria, 1977. Funny story, I saw Suspiria back around like 2012, early 2012, when I hadn't gotten into horror too long ago at that point. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for the dub. I wasn't ready for just, you know, bread and butter American horror. That's what I was used to, just getting into. I watched the movie, I was like, this ain't for me. Time went on. I experienced more movies. I started watching American-style stuff that was really just trying to emulate what Mr. Argento and Mr. Fulci were doing in Italy. Then I would go back and realize how wrong I was, and that, you know, Suspiria really is a masterpiece. From the way it was shot, to the acting, to the music. Yeah, I think there are shots in Suspiria that are just iconic. Moments where you see the body hanging from the cathedral in the main room that just stick with you, to the score, which is a character. I mean, it really is. We talk about horror movie scores. I think you have to look at Suspiria as one of the greatest, you know, scores of all time. So yeah, Suspiria's got to be in the top 10. Coming in at number 8, guys, this is where things are going to start to get wobbly for some of you, and you're going to disagree with the order of this. May not disagree with the titles, but the order will get you guys. Coming in at number 8 is going to be Steven Spielberg's Jaws. I mean, what do I need to say about Jaws, really? I mean, it's classic as all get out. I think there was kind of cinema before Jaws and after Jaws. This movie was pretty responsible for taking, you know, genre styles and making it, you know, big Hollywood movies. This, in all intents and purposes, could have been like just a small drive-in type movie, but Spielberg made it huge, and it became a blockbuster. I think Jaws is one of the first movies that really coined the term blockbuster, because people were lined up around the block, so to speak. Now, other movies like The Exorcist were doing this too, but I think Jaws was really a driving factor in this becoming like a term. Jaws is the greatest. Are you kidding me? Like, what's better than Jaws in terms of any sort of monster movie? Because, yeah, of course, a shark is a monster, right? The best. And I love the characters. Obviously, the book is a little bit different. They go into some different stuff with, like, Brody's wife having an affair and things like that. but Spielberg knew what to cut and what not to cut, and worked with the writer Benchley on this, and made the greatest. And all the stuff that didn't work when they were making the film with the shark and stuff ended up becoming beneficial with less is more approach with it. So the greatest. I love Jaws. All right, guys, number 7. I think some of you will agree with this being over Jaws, and some of you will not agree with this being over Jaws. But I got to throw it to Alien. The original 79 Alien. Talk about great characters with Sigourney Weaver just being amazing. And, we talk about having the strong female leads and stuff, as early as like 10, 15 years ago, and even till today. But look at this, 1979. I mean, Sigourney Weaver, you kidding me? She's one of the greatest. With Dan O'Bannon writing this as well, with, me being a big Return of the Living Dead fan, I go out of my way to make sure I see things that Dan was involved with. And this just shows why Dan was undeniably talented. I mean, Alien is considered one of the greatest of all time. I have days where I say I prefer Aliens, and I have days where I say I prefer Alien. Today, I say I prefer Alien. I think it's the one. And while I enjoy the action elements of Aliens and things like that, there's something about Alien that just, it's so serious and intense and just horrific. So yeah, I think Alien is probably the best one. Alright guys, number 6, I'm so happy to say his name. You guys know he's my favorite director of all time. I'm throwing it to the legend, rest in peace, George Romero with Dawn of the Dead. I mean, everybody's probably going to have this on their list with Dawn of the Dead. I think this movie's responsible for so many things that we see in the making, of zombie films and the way that they're made today. With Dawn of the Dead, I mean, what's so fascinating about it is the fact that, so much stuff was filmed for this, and we've never really had, like, this complete, total cut, although I do know that people have bootlegged it together, but a movie just where they threw everything at the kitchen sink and filmed so much stuff, so many iconic scenes. Ken Faree has legendary lines and scenes in this movie too. The look of zombies that was just like really perfected in this movie, and everything was just kind of changed from this. But Dawn of the Dead is really just like one of the most amazing films. When you get into horror, there's a list of movies you gotta watch. On the top of that list is George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. Now, Walmart supposedly bought that mall, Monroeville Mall, that has the George Romero statue in it and everything. Guys, don't mess with any of that. We got to keep George's memory alive. This is where I get in a little bit of trouble, but I just can't help the fact that this movie gives me a little bit more shock and awe than Dawn of the Dead, a little bit. I'm throwing it to Mr. Lucio Fulci with Zombie. I mean, this movie is insane. I think Zombie is, one of the absolute greatest zombie films of all time. I mean, and Fulci did stuff that anybody would gawk at. Like, yeah, we're going to get a guy to dress up as a zombie and fight a shark underwater. You're going to do what? Like, what are you talking about? I think the mood of Zombie is unmatched, number one. The gore is equally unmatched. Even then, in 79, the stuff that Fulci was doing, still, a lot of stuff today can't rival how intense it is. So I think Zombie really is that good. It's definitely got and found its audience, but there's a newer generation coming up that may be watching this video or just getting into, classic horror, that they've seen Dawn of the Dead, but they haven't seen Zombie yet. And to that I say, go watch Zombie and it will just shock you. Okay, this is going to be my surprise hit of the list. I feel strongly about this movie, but I am willing to take a little bit of pushback. I'll listen to you guys in the comments. But my number 4 is 1979's Frank Langella Dracula. This is my all-time favorite Dracula movie by any metric. I just think the mood, the atmosphere, the style of this one is just perfect. And they really harp on all the things in the book that I like scene-wise and kind of keep some of the stuff minimal, but still have it. Like, the fact that the boat sequence in this one, you just see a little bit of the aftermath, but it's a high emphasis on the destruction and the damage that Dracula did. As well as Langella's performance, it's equally, creepy, but he's also, like, very suave. He's got both those elements that he blends so well. You got Donald Pleasance from Halloween being in here. I think, I just think it works. I think this is a great version of Dracula. I love the 92 one. Of course, I love Mr. Lugosi's Dracula, but you're not beating, in my opinion, the 79 Langella Dracula. And I also think that the television version, which has kind of more of a decolored kind of look to it, which is the way the director wanted to make the film, is a great way to watch this movie. So get that Scream Factory Blu-ray release. It's a great release. And if you haven't seen this, before you criticize, go check it out and tell me you don't think it's that good. All right, guys, coming in at number 3 is definitely John Carpenter's Halloween. It had to be on the list. I think you were all just kind of wondering where it was going to be. I mean, what do I need to say about this? Halloween, I mean, the greatest... one of the greatest of all time. And, you know, I'm not going to poke fun, or sometimes I have fun with Halloween when I talk about it, but I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to give it to you straight. The greatest score of all time is probably John's Halloween score. And I still think that till this day. For instance, like, some people will say they like the sound of part 2, or they like what Alan Howarth did with 4 or 5 or whatever, with 6. I think any of those iterations would just take what John perfected and put a different spin on it. Because what his score for part 1 is literally the perfect horror movie score I've ever heard. The Halloween theme will live long past any of us. And yeah, I just think the original Halloween is still a great movie. At the end of the day, it's not a movie I watch for scare as much as I watch it for comfort, but that's a quality that is hard to get. And yeah, the original Halloween is a masterpiece. Now, I'm cheating right here with a two-way tie for number 2. I know. I hate doing this, but I can't help it. I guess I could have just made, you know, 17 the start, but the reason I didn't is because I couldn't really choose between the two of which one would have been 2 or 3, so I'm cheating. But it's a two-way tie for second place with The Omen and The Exorcist. Both movies, in my opinion, are perfect horror movies. There are things I prefer storyline-wise about The Omen, but in terms of legendary scenes, you're not beating The Exorcist in that aspect either. But I think both of these movies are literal 10 out of 10s. I love Exorcist 3 even a little bit more, so that's like a 10.1 out of 10. But here's my point. The Exorcist and The Omen are 2 of the absolute greatest horror movies of all time. I couldn't make one better or worse, so I'm cheating right there. They're both number 2. And coming in at number 1, the greatest horror movie of all time, in my opinion, Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, to me, has the greatest opening, the greatest closing, and one of the most in-your-face, craziest experiences I've ever witnessed. I'll never forget watching this movie on MTV for the first time, mind you, right after Hurricane Katrina, where I was moved up where I'm living now, and me and my brother just sat there and we let it happen to us. We watched horror stuff growing up, but we never sat down and watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre before. So when we saw this movie, it rattled us to our core. I mean, it was an experience like no other. Until this day, I go back, when I watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, when I hear that voice say what happened in Texas on a hot summer day, it just sinks me into my chair. Greatest horror film of all time. I will probably never change my mind on that. The greatest horror film from the 70s, and also the greatest horror movie ever made, is that movie right there, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So guys, that's my list. I'm somewhat of a cheater. As you guys see, sometimes I can't help myself, but that's the way I want to just do it. I'm dying to know what your guys' lists would be. Give me your top 16, 17, top 10, or just top 5. Tell me what you agree with or disagree with, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a thumbs up on it, and please sub to the channel, and I can't wait to see what you guys say. So, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see y'all next time. Huge, giant thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Without you guys, this would not be possible. To get behind-the-scenes photos, videos, music, private live streams, and much more, you can subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Thank you to my patrons.